Her right eyebrow does not have the same activation as her left eyebrow. Her left eyebrow is doing the exact same expression that we saw in the cruiser. Her right eyebrow is not. It's an asymmetrical expression, which lets us know this isn't authentic empathy. This isn't authentic pain or fear or grief that she's feeling here. It's forced.
It's a case that shocked America and now the world, following the success of the Netflix documentary, The Crash, the conviction of Mackenzie Shirilla. In 2022, Shirilla was just 17 when she deliberately drove her car at high speed into a commercial building in Ohio, killing her boyfriend Dominic Russo and their friend Davion Flanagan. She has always maintained it was a tragic accident, but the judge ruled the crash was methodical and deliberate, sentencing her to 15 years to life behind bars. The case sparked intense public discourse, with Shirilla and her parents breaking their silence in the documentary, while the victims' families also shared their accounts of the devastating tragedy. I'm Katie Forrester with the US Sun. Be sure to like and subscribe for more true crime deep dives. Joining us now is renowned body language expert Logan Portenier, host and creator of the popular YouTube channel Observe. Today we'll be taking a closer look at Shirilla's TikTok videos, her behavior during her arrest, and her interview featured in the documentary. Hi Logan, thank you so much for joining us. I've obviously been taking a good look at your YouTube channel. You've done so much, and I know that you're very into this case as well. But for those who don't know, if you can just give us a bit of a brief of your background, both personal and professional.
Sure. Background, born and raised in Montana. Grew up on a farm far outside of the nearest city, so being in this sphere is a bit different for me. But then as far as my education goes, started studying nonverbal communication, body language, that vein of understanding. Back in junior high school is when it started piquing my interest. Back then there wasn't too much to be able to go off of, so I started taking psychology classes in college, and kind of Frankensteining my understanding together before I was able to start finding some of the experts in the field that I now have relied on their vast amount of research to be able to help further mine. But then, I started doing YouTube, doing nonverbal communication content on YouTube. It's been 14 years since I've started the channel. It's been full-time for about 6 years or so. And the goal of that YouTube channel was to be able to make this content that I had found so inspiring and so revealing to me more obtainable, because at the time it really wasn't. There wasn't anybody talking about it or discussing it in a critical way, I would say. And so being able to do that's took off around when COVID struck up. Everybody kind of was inside and looking around for things to learn about, and that's when it took off. And it's been full steam ahead ever since.
And you've covered so many cases. What drew you to this one, and first, what did you think of the documentary?
Ooh, this one, what initially piqued my interest, I've got so much that I'm juggling constantly. What initially piqued my interest with it is that a lot of my followers had let me know, like, hey, there's this case coming up, there's a documentary coming out, we would love to be able to see you take a look at it. That's how I hear a lot of these cases, is from the demographics that I work with. They want to see something, so I start looking in to see if it's something that I can do. And then as I started to watch through, I initially watched the Crash on Netflix, which I found to be quite engaging, as I'm sure a lot of the rest of the world has agreed on that. A lot of people have been very interested in it.
And we're going to go through some clips. Like you said, you've already done your own deep dive, as a lot of people have, of things that were missing out of the documentary and then things that were included, including her bombshell interview. What do you find most fascinating about her? You know, is there something that immediately drew you to her character?
Yeah, seeing how her primary functioning was through social media and appearances, that mindset seemed to carry through in a lot of different avenues throughout the rest of my research as well. Her behaviors when she doesn't feel like she's being perceived, watched, and especially in a larger audience, they seem to be a little different than what she does when she's on screen. And so even as I was going through and kind of looking at the materials for this specific interview as well, I was able to compare her on-screen presence, especially in The Crash, that big interview that came up there, and that final aspect of the documentary, compare her nonverbal behaviors then in through the time of her arrest and some of the times that she was sitting in the cruisers and whatnot, which I know that we'll be getting to today. And there are some distinct differences that you're able to tell both across her face and then across the rest of her nonverbal communication as well, as to how she composes herself and presents herself when she is being perceived, when she knows that she's going to be watched and a lot of people are going to be having their eyes on her, as opposed to when she feels like it's a little bit more private or it's less prepared. And that discrepancy is common among people, but it does highlight some aspects of her personality and her approach to this case that I feel are fairly revealing.
Well, we can't wait to hear what you've got to say about these clips. So, as you just mentioned, the first one we're going to go through is quite a few of her TikToks. And this is obviously way before the crash. She was very online, very social media obsessed. It's now been revealed. So the first one is of her and Dominic, her boyfriend, who died in the accident, in her car. Let's take a look at this one.
And if you call me a pothead, make sure you put the most beautiful, most responsible, most productive in front of it. Whack. My way, or the highway.
So what is your first impression of both her and their relationship, just from this brief clip?
Sure. So with these, specifically with like TikToks where they're kind of prepped, you're going to expect a level of performatism regardless. So a lot of the facial expressions that you're looking for, there's not going to be too much that's seeping through. They're very on camera. Even with that though, what a lot of people don't pay attention to is what their bodies say at the same time. Face can communicate very clearly. We've done that for thousands of years, but our bodies have been going for a lot longer than that. And so we're not aware of that. We don't pay as much attention to it. So what I do find fascinating is that the emotional representations across the two of them, they're not synchronized. He doesn't seem to be as stoked for this video that she's filming as she does, which from the research that I was able to do, the other footages, that emotional incongruency seemed to exist pretty steadily throughout their relationship. It didn't seem as though they were quite on the same page emotionally as what they even wanted to really try to present within the documentary itself. So you see her, she's going through and she's doing her different poses and expressions for the sake of the video. And for his side of things, he seems much more reserved and subdued. He is leaning in. That engagement is good to see. Anytime that a person or a couple is doing an activity, mutual engagement is good to be able to see. He is engaged. It's not to an overt degree. And even on his facial expression, that side of things, because he's not performing as much for the camera as she is, we're seeing a fair bit of desynchronization across the upper half of his face and the lower half of his face, which lets us know that anything that we're kind of seeing on that is probably going to be forced. It's performative, and he does a little lackluster kind of asymmetrical smile on the bottom half of his face. The upper half stays pretty constant, the exact way that it was throughout the entirety of the rest of it. And for this one, it just kind of shows the dynamic between the two. I don't think that he was as fascinated by social media and having an online presence in that way as she was, whereas you can tell by her energy and her presentation, that's her goal.
And as you just mentioned there, we're probably going to see that even more so in this next clip. And obviously we've heard a lot about their toxic relationship. We've read text messages between the two. And it does seem in a lot of her clips that he's more in the background and she's very much the star of the show. Let's take a look. We're going to take a look at two together back to back. So first, another one of them together with her in the mirror. And then there's also some more of her posing. Let's take a look at these.
It's not easy being the hot neighbor, the stoner neighbor, and the naked neighbor, but somehow I make it work.
I hate skinny skinny get no love. I see a group of skinny I call them bone thugs.
As you mentioned, he's very much in the background here. What did you think of those two?
Sure. For his specifically, again, Mackenzie is doing a lot of the posing. She's hitting her different looks that she wants to during this. In the background, you could see initially Dom's nonverbal communication. He's doing a very light self-hug. You can see him holding both of his arms there. That is misconstrued in a lot of areas as exclusively defensiveness. It can just be comfort. What I do find more interesting is that he does shift later on to holding both hands in front. So both of those clusters there, he has one in front and then he has his hands clasped in front like that. Both of those signal a level of discomfort to have both of them following one after another like that. If they had just been individually, sure, maybe he was just crossing his arms, something like that. From this, I can see pretty clearly that I think that he was willing to be in the videos that he was in, but it was not something that he wanted to necessarily be as big a part of. Again, emotionally speaking, he keeps a pretty neutral face throughout that while she's going through her sides of things. Speaking on her side of things, what we're able to kind of glean from this, even though it is very performative, we can kind of understand how she behaves in that performative mode, what she wants to highlight about herself and facets like that. So we'll see in the first one where they're both together, she's hitting her various poses or whatnot, and then she does some preening gestures, which preening gestures are when a person is aware of how they look, they can adjust aspects of themselves. It can be their hair, it can be their clothing, it can be jewelry, what have you. But she's doing that very overtly. But that's the function of the video. So we're seeing again this dichotomy between the two of them. He's present. He's in the video. She wants him in the video, but this is really for her. This entire show that they're kind of putting on there, which I do feel is indicative of a level of their actual the nature of their relationship as well. Is that there was a pretty overt level of performatism in that, and even with how different parties perceived them, the closer the family or the friends and whatnot, the social group was, they kind of could see behind the scenes of some of those. But as it was further out, as it became less acquainted, it became more and more performative to where we see the eventual manifestation of it online as she wants to be the star of the show, and he's kind of there and he's being present, albeit uncomfortable, reserved, and needing to do a little bit of self-soothing to be able to make it through. But yeah, those are the big behavioral dynamics that I can see in that one.
And in the second one, she seems very obsessed with her slim frame, which we've seen a lot of as well. And we're going to see another one here, finally, of her driving the car and posing again for TikTok. Let's take a look. Now, that's very brief, but obviously knowing how things ended, you know, it's quite disturbing to see her not paying attention to the road.
Yeah.
She's posing. She's got some great big pink fluffy thing in front of her. You know, how does that make you feel seeing that? And obviously knowing the outcome, it must make you feel a little bit sick, really.
Yeah, it's difficult. This is not the only example of Mackenzie having video proof of distracted or inebriated driving, which is one of the overt problematic areas of this case in general. With that, you can see that she's not keeping her eyes on the road. She's very much focused on her phone, despite her being behind the wheel. She's the one operating the vehicle, still very distracted. And even with that, her facial expressions that she's doing, it's centered around, again, the phone. You don't see her checking in regularly. You can kind of see through her glasses there. She's not checking in with the road very regularly. It's very focused on the phone and what she appears like on it. Hitting her specific facial expressions as well. And on those facial expressions, this helps us understand how she will behave and appear when she's performing. There might be some of that lip pursing that we kind of see in there. There's some head tilts in there as well as she's trying to be perceived in a very specific way. So that performative nonverbal communication comes in handy in future situations, because then you can keep an eye out for some of those patterns that may or may not show up in the future, give some clarity to some other nonverbal sequences that we might be looking at here. But yeah, that distracted driving, it's very present throughout this case, and it's pretty hard to watch, especially knowing what everything wraps up in. It's just a rough time.
And these earlier TikToks, obviously the crash was in July 2022. So obviously it really paints a picture of someone who's self-obsessed, who's already, it seems, quite reckless. We're about to see footage now, I think it's around November when she was arrested. So this is months later. She's recovered from multiple surgeries, I believe, at this point, after she was the only survivor in the crash.
Yeah.
And I think you might agree that the body language is very different here. So let's take a look at the first clip from just seconds after she was arrested. Obviously, you've seen these as well, and you've seen the longer versions of them. So how do you feel about her body language here, and do you feel it's suddenly changing?
Sure. So what I noticed throughout a number of points throughout the full length of this video, which you've been able to capitalize on a good portion here. This is what Mackenzie Shirilla, in my opinion, looks like when she's genuinely stressed and genuinely sad or grieving about a situation. There's not a reason for a show. I don't know that she's aware that there's a camera pointed at her or that she's going to be perceived in this area. And so what we're going to be able to see is more of her unfiltered nonverbal communication. And with this, she is feeling what would be considered in that vein of the universal emotion of sadness. There's grief, there's panic and stress, everything that can go into that. But with that, what really gives it away is the action in her forehead area. So I'm going to be using a couple technical terms here to be able to be more specific here. But what we're seeing predominantly is action unit 1 activation, which is the middle portion of your eyebrows here when they go upwards. During genuine sadness and grief, pain, something along those lines, you can see that happening symmetrically. If it's more performed, a lot of people will end up having light asymmetrical activation because it's not genuine. Their body's not really saying, hey, you're sad, you're grieving right now, let's represent that. It's pushed in there. Hers is symmetrical, which we'll be able to get to see a little bit of a contrast when we get to the Netflix interview here in a bit. But with that symmetrical activation, it's pretty substantial. So her eyebrows are drawing down ever so slightly, but pushing upwards pretty substantially in the middle. And that expression is common in authentic grief, authentic sadness. Something else that had come up prior when she was being arrested and taken into this cruiser that we're watching her in there, she was showing a lot more wide eye expression as well. She has fairly relaxed eye positioning in general when she's not panicked. And so this widening of her eyes, it indicates genuinely that she's feeling anxious. This would be considered fear. And while she might not be terrified or anything like that, it would at least trigger as fear to the anxiety level, stress level, something along those lines. So we're seeing both the combination of the grief across the upper half of her forehead, and her eyes are showing the fear as well. Then when we get down to the rest of her face, some things that show more psychophysiology rather than just physical movements is a lot of the inflammation around her nose and upper lip in there is letting us know that this is coming from an authentic place. It's very difficult for a person who isn't a trained actor or have some of the other mechanisms to do it to get into this state of your eyes are leaking, your nose is leaking, like everything's causing some issues there. Hers are, which lets me know that this is authentic. She's not a phenomenal actress. It's not like she's going on into any A-list movies. So this is going to be something that's authentic, not only because it's synchronized across both halves of her face, synchronized across the up and down as well. So we're also seeing a lot of, again, a technical term, nasolabial deepening, more or less. And so it's this area right here around the corners of your nose. When you're feeling intensely sad, a lot of people, when they're trying to like mitigate that and manage that, they develop what's called the stiff upper lip. You've heard that term everywhere used around, and it's centered around that. There's activation in the corners of these nose where she's trying to hold her expression back a little bit from being the full out sobs and it's squinching your face all up. But seeing that fully across, that's authentic sadness, grief, pain, fear, and anxiety kind of all coupled into one expression there. Again, unfiltered, because she doesn't know that she's being really perceived at this point. It's not a performance, which there is a very big difference between her performance and her real raw emotional state.
And we see another one here that she's been transferred to another car here. So again, she's in the back of a police vehicle. Let's take a look at this one. First, I was just going to ask, for a teenager that's been arrested, in connection with a murder, would you have expected a lot more distress here than this? And what does that say about her, do you think?
I think the distress side of things is complex. Obviously, everybody responds to trauma and traumatic instances differently. So with it, some understanding of how she responds to those stressful situations is important. From my understanding, she's not the type to initially, when there's a genuine conflict, there's an actual stressor, negative stimuli that she perceives as a threat. she doesn't leap to, I'm going to fight this. And so she's either going to fight, freeze, or fawn. Those are the veins that we're going to be looking at. And she seems to do more of the freezing aspect of things. So when a person can be stressed and they don't perceive a way out, one of the ways that they cope is to just shut down. And so that's where you'll see a lot more neutrality come into the facial features and whatnot. And then what we're then seeing even within this specific ride here is that emotions will start to try to creep through that shutdown, because obviously people are processing the whole time. And that's one of the things that we unfortunately don't get the advantage of, is hearing what her inner dialogue is saying. But even with that, it seems as though, and we can go back to the original arrest footage as well if we need to, it seems as though her response to stressors is to freeze, to shut down. And so a lot of people are seeing this like, oh, not a lot of emotion is happening here. Wouldn't she be in torment? She likely is, but her body won't necessarily let her emote that fully because she's in a freeze response. And so a really clear way that a lot of people can kind of more understand on this is, if you're not comfortable in front of a camera and then suddenly you have to be in front of a camera, most people will start shutting down. They can't emote as well. They don't find it as easy to talk or gesture or whatnot because they're just not used to it. And it's perception. It's intense perception. It's almost like a threat to them. And so we're seeing similar behavior from Mackenzie in this situation. And I think it's functioning around the same psychological mechanism of she's in that specific freeze response. But then interestingly, again, even whilst her resting state is very, very neutral. There's not a lot that's happening while she's in this specific state. What is more indicative of authentic stress and sadness in this is how the emotion plays out. So emotional states, they have a profile. It usually lasts about 0.5 seconds to 4.5 seconds, give or take, within that various vein of emotion. And so you'll expect to see a bit of an onset of that emotion and then a fall off as well. When you're watching somebody who's performing, you'll see a lot of crashes in between. So they'll be emoting a specific way, and then it's almost like they remember like, oh, I should be sad right now. And then they'll crash into sadness, something like that. For hers, you could see it start to kind of creep through the cracks of her rather reserved expression beforehand. Starts with a lot of, again, eyebrow activation in there. We're seeing a lot of the outer eyebrows and inner eyebrows working, and that pushes towards that sadness and stress and anxiety again. And again, we're seeing the corners of the nose activating, not in the vein of disgust, where you would often see in disgust crinkles in the nose bridge up here. With the side of crying, you don't often see that. You'll just see the activation come in as they're trying to hold back their emotional state. And so we're seeing her wrestle through this emotional state, albeit all subdued, in a synchronized fashion. We're seeing the onset of an emotion. And so, yes, she is very subdued, and it does seem very detached. But considering the context of her behaviors elsewhere, that detachment and that subduedness doesn't strike me as out of the ordinary. Had she been overtly, like really trying to ham it up, to me, that almost would have seemed like more of a red flag, because in other areas, when she has really lit up non-verbally, it's been for a performance. She wants people to see, she wants people to think a certain way, and so she's managing perception rather than actually being authentic. In this area, again, she has no reason to really force it, fake it, or do anything different. She doesn't know she's being watched. And so what we're probably seeing is more of an authentic emotional state than her performances that we've seen elsewhere.
And we're going to watch another 2 clips here. We'll do them back to back so that you can see, as like you say, the reality sort of sets in of the situation. And I think the mask is slipping here. So this is her being transferred to a different car. And then there's a second clip of her finally on the way to the station as they pull up at the station.
Hi, Mackenzie. Step out for me. I'm Detective Jesus. I'm the one who's been investigating the crash. You're under arrest for aggravated murder ×2, okay? Nobody's gonna ask you any questions. Nobody's gonna bother you. Can I have your key, please?
Could you please be careful taking this one off so it doesn't break the bracelet, please?
You got it. You got it. Do you want my glasses? No.
Thank you.
You got it.
Now, as we know in that first one, that obviously you've watched as well previously, that she is begging for her bracelets not to be cut off, which my understanding was that they were in memory of Dominic. So what do you think of that one? First of all, she seems quite distressed there.
Yeah. This is one of those areas where you can see a little bit more of the fear coming in. As we've talked about earlier, her eyes stay at a fairly relaxed state. Even her upper eyelids, they rest a little bit lower. But in these instances where she's interacting with the officers, she has to get out and whatnot, you can see that her eyelids are pulled back much further. And that's indicative of fear. It can be anger as well, but she's not feeling angry right here. The rest of her face lets you know pretty clearly that this isn't anger. We're still seeing the same eyebrow glabella region activation that we have seen in the other areas, letting us know, and it's symmetrical, so it lets us know that is an authentic representation. She's feeling anxious and she's feeling sad and grievous about what's going on. And then along with that, her eyes are pulled back more. Alongside those tells as well, around her mouth, we're seeing a lot of the same activation in her nasolabial area there. And she's inflamed. She's been crying. She's having a difficult time. That's authentic. And so this is one of those areas where I feel like the fear and the anxiety starts to shine through a little bit more, even while she's trying to tell, don't, please be careful with the bracelets, which that was also mentioned in another area when she was being taken into her actual cell, or the actual jail situation itself. She had requested if she could keep the bracelets that they were mentioning here in this video as well. So those obviously do mean a substantial amount to her. And I don't think that the meaning, her holding sentimental value to those bracelets, was ever in question. I think that the reasoning behind her decision was more complex than I just don't like this person anymore. And so her still wanting, please be careful with the bracelets, that being such a predominant thought in this rather intense time, because she was 17 years old at this time. I believe it was, 17, something along those lines. And so that's a lot to be going through. And so for that to still be the psychological aspect that she's still focused on, it's authentic, albeit she's still reeling from the rest of the experience that she's having there of switching cop cars and whatnot. It had to be pretty intense for her to work with. And then as we're in the back of the car and riding there, this is more of I think that this is more immediate for her. And so she's feeling these effects a little bit more intensely at this time. We're seeing one of the most predominant expressions that she falls into is she closes her eyes and you can see her saying something. And from what she's saying, I'm not a mouth reader. I can't tell what she's saying, but you can at least tell that it's repetitive. And anytime that you see a repetitive behavior like that, it can be physical and it can be verbal as well. Those are centered around trying to calm yourself down. So if you see somebody manipulating the same spot repeatedly, it's self-soothing. They need to calm their limbic system down. That can also come in through mantras. People say certain things. Some people will use prayers. Other people will use sayings that they're used to saying in the past or have meant something of value to them. And that does the same. It serves the same purpose. It calms them down from where they were at before. The prolonged eye blink in there, that if it were depending on the circumstance that it's in, if you're in an interaction, in an interrogation or an interview and a question's asked, and then you see that long of an eye blink come up, it could be what would be considered a blocking behavior and that you want to distance yourself, a red flag or a pin as it might be referred to as. In circumstances like this, the other predominant reason for a prolonged eye blink is to hold an emotion at bay, either in. And so if she's feeling an intense emotion, close your eyes. It helps you hold it. It kind of keeps it all encompassed within yourself. Or it could be if she's worried about an emotion fringing in or somebody else's stimuli, negative stimuli coming in. Same sort of situation, eye blocking gesture coming in there. So we're seeing her emotional representation still be heavily influenced by grief, by sadness, and by anxiety, as shown through the eyebrows and lower half of her face. But then with that prolonged eye blink in there as well, that lets us know that she's trying to mitigate what's going on as well. This is definitely one of those areas where she's not trying to let it come to fruition. She's trying to manage it. And that plays out in various ways, not the least of which is through those blocking style gestures like that. So in this area, she's feeling she's probably panicking, judging by her face, and she's trying to figure out a way to self-soothe and block some of that out, probably just to make it through.
And as the weeks and months went on, she was obviously went through the period which she was in custody, and then she went through the trial. We saw her sobbing in court, and we saw a lot of similar behaviour here where she looked like she was genuinely upset. She was learning her fate. And then she was finally convicted. 3 years have gone by now, and we also then saw her in the Netflix documentary finally sitting down and breaking her silence. Now, you've obviously seen it in full, but for those who haven't seen, let's take a look at the interview footage.
I try to wake up and be the best person I could be every day, stay out of trouble. There's not a moment that doesn't pass where I don't think about them, or I don't feel the pain in my chest.
So she comes in there first of all, and I feel like this is a defining image of that documentary now, is her with her arms folded. What does that say immediately as she sits down, she folds her arms in that way, and her posture is like that?
Sure. So that immediate sit down, it probably is centered around a level of comfort, needing to self-soothe. Arm holding, you can even boil it back around to a self-hug. A lot of people will find comfort in that. That's also where the blocking side of things can come in there. So the fact that she's sitting down and crossing her arms immediately lets us know that she's probably feeling uncomfortable about what's about to happen there and needs to block off and self-soothe a little bit. So that's what I'm seeing from that. It's just letting me know that she's a little on edge in regards to that. What I do feel is probably more revealing in that instance is not so much her posturing, but her expression is intentional. And the reason that I think that this is an intentional expression that she's putting in here is, one, she kind of pushes it in. Like, you can kind of see her push it into her face at the very initial portions of things, but it's desynchronized across the two halves of her face. So it's the same, I'm feeling pain and I'm anxious. You could see her trying to activate her glabella and raise her eyebrows and give this empathetic consternation expression that she's going for. But instead of it being symmetrical, which it was in the prior times that we saw with her being arrested and the dealing with the ride in the cruiser and whatnot, now we're seeing asymmetrical activation. So the one eyebrow on her, I believe it would be her right side, her right eyebrow does not have the same activation as her left eyebrow. Her left eyebrow is doing the exact same expression that we saw in the cruiser. Her right eyebrow is not. And so it's that desynchronization across the two halves. It's an asymmetrical expression, which lets us know this isn't authentic empathy. This isn't authentic pain or fear or grief that she's feeling here. It's forced. Along with that, even further down that vein, on the bottom half of her face, we're seeing similar pursing of the lips that she would do in her prior videos on TikTok, things like that, where she's aware that she's being perceived and she wants to present a specific expression that she feels the most perceivable in. And when she's doing that, it's performance in her TikTok. And when she sits down here, it's still a performance. We've seen what her I'm actually in pain. I'm actually anxious. I'm really having a difficult time with this. We've seen that. We've seen that in the cruisers. When she sits down to do this, she's exclusively trying to convince that mindset to the audience. She wants the people to believe that is how she's feeling, but her body's betraying her right now.
And also, for those who have watched it, they will have noticed that people have mentioned her voice changed as well. What did you think of that?
That one I noticed to begin with, and I wasn't certain about what was going on immediately because I picked up that she talked in a higher register with a little bit more force behind her words in her average everyday life that I had seen before in her TikToks and the interactings with her friends and whatnot that I had been able to witness. And then when we get to this specific interview, she's talking at a lower register. She has a little bit more huskiness to her voice. Some of the verbal tics that she uses as well have shifted. And my immediate thought was this has to be something about the performance. She's obviously performing. She wants people to feel a certain way. And so she shifted her tone, her speaking differently as well to perhaps support that. And it wasn't until I had been watching her and doing some digging on this that I was able to come across some inmates that had talked about how they had witnessed her changing her speech patterns once she had been incarcerated to better fit in with specific crowds within the prison system to be able to achieve more specific goals, which they had also gone on to say a few other things about her wanting to have certain privileges in the prison and be perceived as a specific way within that prison. And that her verbal cadence and the consistency, what she actually said, it had shifted, and it seemed to be a very intentionally done thing to better manage the perception of even just the inmates that she was with. So very fascinating thing.
And do you think that her body language will have to change in prison as well, that she may have to adopt a bit more of a swagger?
I would imagine so, which unfortunately in the clip that we see in the crash, you don't get to see much of her whole body too much. It's mostly just the upper half there. But I would have no doubt, especially considering that she has been in front of social media for so much throughout the rest of her life, that she won't just be adopting a new voice and perhaps some new facial expressions. It will play across the rest of her nonverbal communication as well. Although I do not have the experience to be able to say I know exactly what she's going to do, but judging by the patterns that she's done behaviorally in the past, I have no doubt in my mind that she'll be adjusting her overall nonverbal behavior as well to better fit in and get to where she wants to be in that social circle as well.
And it'll be interesting if we ever see her again, and whether her body language changes if she does speak out again, maybe in a few years or even 10 years. That would be quite interesting to see.
Indeed.
You've obviously covered quite a lot of different cases, seen many convicted killers. Is there anything that shocked you overall? What was the big takeaway from the Mackenzie Shirilla case?
I think the age is one of the aspects of it that adds a lot of complexity to it for me in general, because I know that everybody sitting here can think back to when they were 16, 17 and try to put yourself into the shoes of the people that they're dealing with. And for me, one of the most outrageous portions was how prevalent and problematic her behaviors were before the incident itself, before the catastrophe that it occurred, how prevalent they were and how unaddressed they were as well. Mackenzie Shirilla is, while 100% guilty, she's the one responsible. She did the action, she carried it out herself. I do feel like there is a large amount of responsibility on the parents for allowing her to get to this point. And there's a large amount of evidence that shows that they were aware of problematic behaviors from their child and did nothing to address or show, like, hey, sure, behave problematically, but you're going to have some negative repercussion from that if you do this, so just be prepared. Everything that they did seemed to be centered around softening that and cushioning that. And it feels like this was a circumstance of a child who grew up knowing that they could do whatever they wanted, however they wanted, behave however they wanted, and it would never have a repercussion for them or really anything that they could perceive as important. And then they do something like this, and frankly, the law doesn't care. Like, it doesn't care if you've been sheltered your whole life. If you've done the bad thing, you have to suffer the consequences of the bad thing that you did. And so that was one of the aspects that was highlighted immensely for me, is not just her problematic behavior, but the problematic behaviors of the social circle that kind of helped create her. It was a lot to be able to try to deal with while going through this, seeing those ineptitudes come out in multiple different ways.
It's very disturbing. Sometimes you forget how young she is.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, I think this is probably not the last we'll see of her.
No.
Well, thank you so much. That's been fascinating, especially when you mention about the eyebrows and the way that, both of them go together when it's genuine upset and distress, and then it can be one when it's performative. So thank you for taking us through all of those.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, I think we learned a lot there, looking at everything from her facial expressions and eyebrow movements to her hand placement, and even how her voice completely changed. It's clear Logan brings a real depth of analysis to this, breaking down the body language in a way that adds yet another layer to understanding this case. Like and subscribe for more videos like this one from the US Sun.